smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand and baseball in the summer. Someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer. Baseball in the summer.
Welcome to the Brock v. Mac Legendary Rivals podcast, and we have with us today, need I say more? It's just really the Grooch. It's kind of like a character that it's kind of like a big, lovable character. Chris Gruchy, an original Badger, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine with an asterisk, doing well. I know, unlike some other people, we have crossed paths, not extremely recently, but in the past few years. I think I heard you mention on some other pods that we've stood at the same rink glass and shot the breeze with our kids playing against each other in girls rep hockey, and that's not in the distant past. So hope you're still doing well.
Yeah, like a couple of the old guys at the Muppet Show, kind of standing up against it at O'Brien in Pickering there for sure. So we'll definitely get into the wonderful world of being a hockey parent and how how our girls are doing collectively,
yeah,
and for the rest of it. But why don't we start it off a little bit with, we've generally tended to go backwards, at the start of these things back to 1995. But why don't we start in the present with you, Chris? How are you feeling? Because I think, you've had some, a little bit of a health challenge here that doing your best to deal with, but it's changed the way you've had to live your life a little bit. So why don't we start there? I think it's important for people to get where you're coming from.
I will preface that. So thanks for that, and kind of maybe getting it out of the way, so to speak, so we can enjoy the reminiscing and the look back. But I do want to preface it with saying, my heart goes out to anybody involved in the team who's had challenges or loss. That includes yourself, as well as Coach McRae and even Coach Lounsbury with his challenges. And even, again, as you said, part of this whole thing for Brad Reeson and his family. And so I'm just prefacing it that way because I am dealing with some health challenges, but I try to look at the silver lining that, it's not a terminal illness. It's not, maybe losing a limb in a car accident, that sort of thing. But it is the proverbial invisible illness where it's something on the inside that affects me greatly. And really, to the layperson or to a stranger just passing me by would be none the wiser. So just to sort of give a quick update, I have something called bilateral vestibular loss. So obviously the acronym is BVL. There's a few little cool things. There's like a 3-minute video out there that, when I kind of chat with somebody and they're not too sure, I kind of lead them to that. But realistically, bilateral meaning both sides, vestibular being that little known, or, we take it for granted, amazing system in our body that regulates our spatial awareness and our balance and our head position in the world, where we have, I guess, an X, a Y, and a Z axis in there with little fluid tubes. And, not to get too scientific, but, that does so much for us in our day-to-day lives. and mine is basically not working. There's certain versions where you have, hypofunction, as in, like it's working less, but mine is both sides in there, dead and gone and not coming back. So there's a lot of challenges with that because that's just my general balance and navigating the world. But the kick while you're down, so to speak, is there's another symptom, which is called oscillopsia, and you can take the root word oscillating, which we probably think right away is like a fan, an oscillating fan, which just means a lot of movement. So another term, my vestibular ocular reflex. So in other words, the way your vestibular system connects to your eyesight and I guess kind of interprets in real time what you're seeing. It's kind of like, and again, easy for ball players or ball fans to understand is, that guy in, modern telecasts that'll follow the guy around the bases. And when they pan out, you'll see the guy and he's holding this big contraption, but it's, like strapped to him and he's running around, but it's literally called a Steadicam, right? So the Steadicam is what your vestibular ocular reflex is. So, if you go to walk down the street towards me, your natural gait and your head bob is kind of happening, but that picture of me in front of you is stable. So for me, that is also thrown out of whack. So I have the opposite of the Steadicam. I have if I'm walking towards you down the sidewalk, if I hold my iPhone in front of me on camera mode and just kind of walk towards you and then play it back, that's not going to be a steady picture, right? It's going to be this bobbing kind of all over the place. So put those two things together, and that's my new reality 24/7. It's always like that. It's never not like that. Like there's people who'll ask, how is it now? Is it getting better? This and that. So just to sort of get it all out of the way, it's permanent. There's no surgery, no meds, no anything, because it's, deep in there. It's kind of like the only thing you'll see get at in an autopsy, so to speak. There's no safe way to get in there and figure things out. It's also one of those things that's on the table where, you never know where science and technology will take you, but there's sort of like cochlear implants that can help with hearing and things like that. And they are, sort of experimenting, at a very, very early level for, contraptions that, kind of in the same vein as a hearing aid, but it would sort of hook up to you and maybe help with the things that I've described are the challenges for me. So, I'm not in the best of health. I'm probably the worst health-wise I've been. I don't kind of look like my yearbook picture back in first year right now. And that's just because if you can, again, equate that with sort of fitness and wellness and nutrition, it's pretty hard to put that together because, I've got a treadmill in my basement and sort of even to sort of walk on that at a steady pace just to get your heart rate up, right? It kind of makes your head bob along, and there's really no escape from, your head moving in 3D space to try and get your heart rate up, even to say, oh, let's do an exercise bike. But I don't know about you, but if you try to get on a bike and get your heart rate up, your head is not fixed in one position like you're wearing a neck brace, sort of thing. Your head's kind of bobbing arguably even more than when you're walking, kind of back and forth. So that's a short, long-winded, but still shorter version of the whole thing. I'm sure in sort of the going back and coming back through the years, I can explain, who, what, where, when, why, but that's sort of the gist of it.
Well, I'm sure the McMaster guys will be able to decipher that a lot better than the Brock guys because they, a lot of them are doctors and they have a medical program there. But, Chris, I think the other thing is that what we are learning after 30 years of going backwards is, we're trying to educate because, we're 50-year-old men now. We're not 20 anymore. And, there's lots of things we've talked about. We've talked about mental health, which is incredibly important for guys this age in particular. Brad Reeson was and Jeff Lounsbury, both about screening for colon cancer.
Yep.
There's other things. And, I think one of the things that's really prevalent is guys don't like to go to the doctor. They don't like to admit when they're not feeling great. They don't like to check in all that much. And, I think it's important that we learn that lesson, especially as we're getting up there a little bit, because you never know. If you're feeling off, there's probably a good chance that you are off in some form or fashion. So,
Yeah.
So we'll go in the slow and steady and head the fixed time machine back in time here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell a story that I don't think anyone knows.
Ooh.
Specifically about
spicy.
You. Oh, yeah. So you kind of came on the radar heading into training camp, but a little bit prior to. I don't think most people know that.
Right.
And it was because the Toronto Blue Jays went to Coach McRae and said, we have this really big kid. And, for the record, at that time, I think you're about 6'5", 6'6".
Well, Colin Tyler will tell you 5'11", just to get under my skin. But officially, for the record, it's 6'4". So yeah. I'm not quite as big as those other couple of guys, like a Todd Nye or Ronnie Strau. But it's 6'4". Says it in the yearbook, Jim.
It's pretty precious coming from Colin and his 5'7" stature.
Oh.
So they had contacted Coach McRae.
Yeah.
And Coach McRae said, look, we've got this kid that they want to send to us just for us to really get a look at and figure out what to do. He's a big kid, and his name is Grooch Gruchy. And he's left-handed. They'd like to see if he could pitch.
Yeah, no.
So the only time I ever had to do an assessment, other than give scouting reports to Coach McRae about, some of the Oshawa Metro League players, is you came early prior to training camp, and I took a catcher named Shane Alderson, who was from Peterborough, and I had to do assessments on whether you could become a left-handed pitcher. And
you know what? I don't. It's funny. Before you continue, I have no recollection of what you are now describing. I knew the part that you've gone over with the Jays and McRae, because I can speak to that and let you know through my lens. But I don't remember ever throwing a few pitches for you to watch or whatever.
Oh, Jeez. Yeah. And so it was, I think we did it in Thorold. Okay. I'm going to say it was Thorold, but
I'm just going to giggle all the way through this part.
This is so bad. It's so bad to say after 30 years, but.
I mean, the bottom line is I'm not a pitcher.
That much is true. So what I actually said to McRae is hilarious, though. I think Teddy and I and Shane Alderson were there, and you had to throw, and I had to show you some basic mechanics, which for me, I'm not a teacher, and if I teach anyone my mechanics, they're going to get jailed. But I remember the first time you wound up and you threw the ball to the catcher, and I thought to myself, my God, he's huge. He's got to be able to throw harder than that.
No.
And you couldn't. So I was like, I'm going to have to. So I actually said to Mike McRae that you couldn't break a wet paper bag with your fastball.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't take offense, because I knew you were trying. That's kind of like a binary answer. He wanted to know yes or no, and it was a hard no.
The answer was pretty emphatic, and he's like, oh, all right. So actually, he pivoted obviously, and you became a first baseman of great skill with the team. But I just remember thinking, man, he has to be able to throw harder than that. He's bigger than I am and stronger than that. And you had a full arc mechanic. So usually you get guys who can't throw because they kind of short arm the ball a little bit. So they're kind of like shot putting it.
Yeah.
No, you had the full pitching mechanic at least down, and it just didn't come out very hard. So I was like, well, I don't have to worry about my spot on the team is what I first thought.
There you go. Big lefty check. Joe Poelman.
It was funny. I think that the exact quote I gave him was he couldn't break a wet paper bag with his fastball, so you might want to try something different. And
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I was by trade and by reputation and by every other sense a first baseman anyway.
yeah,
So it would have been news to me. I guess. I mean, again, I've enjoyed getting through all the podcasts up until this one, and just even the sort of the opposite of Todd. To be like, hey, you're big and imposing, and it would be kind of cool if we could make you serviceable on the mound and turn him around in that direction, and then kind of maybe test that out on me. And it was just nope, you stick to what you're doing and go do that well.
yeah, I do clearly recall that it was a request that came from the Jays, and Mike talked to me about it, and we quickly pivoted to first base. And so, what was that connection with the Jays and that discussion one of the reasons you chose Brock University, or was there another
Oh,
rationale?
I got a fun little non-linear path here for you to enjoy.
Yeah.
Perfect for a podcast. Um, so really kind of, I guess maybe chunking it out is, I think it was Rob Green who said, in the beginning, he wasn't even really an athlete as a child. He was just kind of doing whatever, and it didn't really involve sports. I kind of ironically found myself in the same boat. I was firstborn, and neither of my parents were really into sports. It's not like you kind of get born into that family where it's like, oh, my dad played this and this, my mom played this and this, and it just kind of organically happens where you're around it and you eat, sleep, and breathe it, and you're involved. I kind of I think I remember my mom put me in soccer just to sort of, do something athletic. Again, just kind of being a kid, but just it didn't revolve around sports, strangely enough. But, ended up, it's kind of like, once you start doing something, you want to do it really well and having that mindset and that attitude. So, made my way up to, I guess, rep soccer, but, it kind of hit a turning point at, I guess, about 12 years old, playing rep soccer and thinking, or I guess my mom, good on them, even though they didn't have athletic backgrounds, they were still trying to sort of, figure out what would work out for me to just be busy and active and get that social piece. And I don't know where it came from. I probably should have asked her if she remembers, but my mom was like, you know what? You're kind of outgrowing the soccer piece. Like, I was getting taller and bigger and stronger. And it kind of was almost a waste, you might say, to be, running around on the soccer field. Not for lack of enjoying it. It was fine, but, it's not like I was missing it when I stepped away. And she just said, how about baseball? I don't even know if it was like kind of the thing where you go through sort of the municipal spring guide or whatever, says, hey, come on out. Cause obviously no internet or anything back in the day. So you're going through the thing, and my mom's like, hey, why don't I sign you up for baseball? And I'm like, whatever, like, it's fine. And again, to date myself, I'm a 1975 guy. So, the Jays won the pennant when I was 10, started getting my attention, switching over from a playing standpoint and starting cold turkey at 12. That was the Jays were right in the thick of it in 86, and then 87 was Manny Lee through the legs and the 7-game debacle at the end of the year with the Tigers. And then, and then the rest of it speaks for itself, right? 88, 89, right through to 92, 93. So maybe I just hit that lightning rod of, switching over and having that sort of predictable momentum socially and culturally with the Jays doing so well. And I still remember this day, just house league. And again, not just being kind of a general athlete and not a ball player, is, went out and played my first house league game. A little park, by the way, I grew up in Scarborough. Shout out to Colin, who's, another big Scarborough guy. And a little park called Corvette Park. And it's just because the street just happened to be like Corvette Drive or whatever, just a little nondescript street. So Corvette Park. and just kind of closed my eyes and swung and just absolutely bombed it out to left. No fence or anything, just one of these 12-year-old house league, and ran all the way around and thought, hey, that was kind of cool. So that might have been sort of the impetus for getting the itch. Like, who knows if you went 0 for 4 with 4 Ks and whatever. I could throw and catch as well as anybody else, but I guess that kind of got things rolling. And growing up in Scarborough, it had its own league that was not affiliated with like the Leaside Metro League or anything. It was the SBA. And again, Colin, very familiar with it. He played for a team within the SBA called Agincourt. And I played most of my years in there, or all of them, with a team called Birchmount. And there are other teams like West Hill. And, these are kind of like hockey related names that people would recognize too, right? Your Wexfords and your Scarborough Villages and your West Hills and your Birchmounts and all that. So Colin and I, funny enough, we're probably crossing paths regularly without knowing each other. Just kind of like you're that guy on the other team, like you're doing well for yourself. I'm doing well for myself. Probably a conversation here and there where he's holding me on first or I'm holding him, and just none the wiser that we were going to eventually, become lifelong friends and, have a lot of stories to tell. From there, got to that age where I thought, maybe if I'm doing pretty well, because, I was hitting well for average and for power and doing my thing at first defensively, like picking balls left and right and making diving plays, like just really enjoying the defensive side of first base as well. Not, pitching the occasional inning here and there as a filler, not starting any games. I'll tell you though, remind me to tell you that I started a game at Kinsman. Remind me to tell you.
Hey.
I started a game. So make a note.
I will.
So anyway, this is, and so I thought to myself, I need to be more visible. And again, like not really thinking, just naive to the fact that, as well as I do in that age, just no internet, no socials. Like you just really don't know, who not what kind of like, how do I get noticed? Like, I'm a big, kind of the being told a lot, you can't teach size. So, I was a big frame, clay to mold, all those kinds of things. Like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll try, like 110% to do it well. And ended up making calls, I think, cold calling. I think I cold called Leaside Metro League teams going, like, can you use a guy like me? Because here I am in the SBA. I think maybe Colin had moved on to Thornhill by then, but again, I didn't know him personally. So ironically, here's the 6 degrees of Gruchy as opposed to Kevin Bacon is I made contact with the East York coach, which at the time was Andrew Green, and said, hey, like what are things looking like? And again, I'm kind of a victim of my own situation in the sense that, big imposing guy, left-handed. Well, okay, if you're not pitching, are you playing first or are you playing, an outfield position? And, I could get around the outfield at the time if I wanted to, but it just wasn't sort of something I wanted to pursue. So really, I was, again, a victim of my own, I guess, stubbornness by saying, like, I'm a first baseman. And I guess, if you really twist my arm, I can be an outfielder. So Andrew Green said, well, we have this sort of fixture kind of a guy at first base, and I don't remember his name, but he was a guy who, it almost seems like, it sounds better 30 years later, right? Kind of a cartoonish, not in a bad way, but a cartoonish character in that he was this big, imposing first baseman who clearly worked out, and he had his sleeves tucked up, and he had an East York Bulldog tattoo on his goddamn arm. And I'm thinking, okay, I think maybe first base is locked up at this Leaside Metro League team. So funny enough, I played some right field for Andrew Green. And again, I don't blame him. It was kind of like okay, if you want to sneak me into a game at first base, I can, show you what I got defensively. But this guy was hitting, he was kind of like hitting middle of the lineup, counted on for run production. And there's probably no way I'd be knocking them out of the lineup offensively. But so really they were going to hang their hat on that. And it was kind of like, well, you can play with us if you want to play, the outfield. And I just remember playing, I don't remember how many games. It wasn't very long. It was long enough for me to just say, okay, like this guy really, he could have just turned me away. He let me come in. I wore the uniform. I got into some games, but it just didn't feel right. It just kind of felt like I was being shoehorned in there as opposed to being a part of something and feel like, so, for better or for worse, I didn't give it too long. And then I just said, hey, do you know, maybe is there another team around that might need somebody like me, but where I can play to my strengths? And sure enough, a little team hiding out in the West End by the name of Rexdale in their burgundy jerseys. You might say that they're always looking for better talent. So they welcomed me in, and I embraced the opportunity because, I didn't want to be, have an ego or think, oh, well, I'm above that. I thought, you know what, I just wanted an opportunity to get into this Leaside Metro League. If, it would have been nice to be a part of East York and stuck it out with Green. But realistically, I just didn't know, where that was going to go. Like, were they, a team with more awareness and more credibility and, a better reputation? Sure. But I thought, you know what, at the end of the day, if you're in the league, you're in the league. And if you hit well off of some of the, bigger names, then baseball's a game, as you know, where you can make a name for yourself regardless of how, good or bad your team is. So I embraced that opportunity and, obviously played, was the starting first baseman, hit in the middle of the lineup, had a lot of success there. I hit for a decent average, hit for power, played the first base that everybody knows me for. And then that's where it kind of comes in, because the Jays connection was, I can't remember if this predates joining Rexdale or after. It's kind of blurry, but we're in that like 17 to 20 age range, 17 to 19 age range. And I went out to one of those open Jays tryouts where they just had this, I can't even remember what it was this massive property in the West End. I just remember driving out there, and I kid you not, there were hundreds upon hundreds of people there. So like it put the Brock summer first year tryout to shame in terms of sheer numbers. But of course, the Blue Jays had the staff to manage it, right? Like, they chunked everything out, had all these zones, but holy cow, was it ever massive. It was like, honest to God, 300-400 people, maybe even more, because it was open. It was literally like, I don't know, something in the newspaper. Again, no socials, no internet. I forget how I found out, but I went out and thought, what the hell? So I went out with some of my teammates from the time, and we all hopped in the same car and went out there. Long story short, I did all the drills and did all that, and they cut the day down to a game of 9v9 at the very end, where nobody else in the entire tryout was a part of it except for 9v9. And they invited me into that game from that day. So that might have been my first taste of, you know what, I'm an all-around athlete. I enjoy baseball. I also played a lot of volleyball. We can touch on that too, because they do kind of overlap and intertwine with my Brock story. But maybe that was sort of like the little pick-me-up that was like, okay, there's hundreds of people here, and we're in this 9v9 scrimmage at the end, and they chose me to be in it. So, I didn't do anything other than try my best and try to sell myself, and I guess it worked.
I personally think it was the lovely color of your jersey. I remember the maroon Rexdale jersey now.
Oh, and I don't mind those. They're nice. They're like a very deep maroon. They're all right.
You could have maybe we're prepping you for your long-standing rivalry with McMaster, because they had maroon too. But
exactly, maybe they're like, get it out of your system now.
I do remember you coming in the maroon jersey. Actually, I don't know whether that was to camp or whether it was that little.
Yeah, I don't know.
10 minutes on the mound we spent together prior to
that.
Yeah. So that's great. Look at I can say this because I was there. In the Leaside League, they would always have at first base some tenured third or fourth year junior there that was typically sitting in that, sitting in that tenured position. It was usually a guy in his last year and someone that was sitting in the middle of the lineup, and all the Leaside teams looked the same, I know that East York program pretty well. There were the Butler brothers there, and later on a guy named Shane Whalen and Doug Whiteside played there. There's it's a program that has people kind of on a track, similar to what they had in Oshawa. So
here's the funny thing is Doug Whiteside and Victor Chard, who both have played for Brock, both were teammates of mine with Birchmount, which was my SBA team.
Okay.
So we actually go way back.
So you guys, trying to catch on in the East York. And East York is probably one of the harder programs to catch on to. They've got a big demand there and usually have teams together for quite a while. So good for you. I mean, because really, Chris, I think playing time and feeling like you're comfortable in a team setting is far more important than sitting and getting, some patchwork duty at East York. I think it probably benefited you quite a bit.
For sure.
So tell me about the volleyball connection and, how the roads lead to Brock at this point. You're playing,
it kind of, Sorry, what was the last part?
I was just saying you made the decision to do what's best for your baseball career and play more. And how does that summer, the tail end of that high school year and summer lead to Brock?
Well, just to finish up the baseball side is I don't remember, again, I'm sure it followed I think they were mutually exclusive, but there was a different thing where the guy who ran the Birchmount organization in the SBA, great, older guy, very understated. His name was Roy Dale. So just a shout out to him. And I forget how it came about, but I think Colin Tyler clarified it for me that the gentleman's name was Bill Bykowski, and he was sort of a Southern Ontario Jays guy, making the rounds. And somehow I secured, and this is why I thought it was funny about the whole, see if I can pitch piece, because essentially Bill was going to come down and see me, and we were going to meet at a batting cage somewhere in Scarborough. And essentially I was just going to hit for him. And I was going to have this little one-on-one of all things, not like at a game or at a scrimmage, just kind of like, okay, this guy's literally just going to stand there and watch the mechanics of you hitting. So the funniest story is I didn't own my own bat at that point. I don't know how many people did. You just kind of show up to the game and you see the 3 or 4 bats that the team owns and you pick the one that's most likely to bring you success. So Roy ended up giving me a brand new bat from Birchmount that they had back in their team clubhouse. And he said, here's a brand new bat for you. Go get them. And I remember the funniest thing was, again, I didn't have my own bat. For some reason, I didn't have access to my team bats where I could have at least picked one that was, a length and a weight that was in my comfort zone. So this was like, I think I remember my career, it was more, I was like a 34-30 guy. I wanted that little bit of length, being a tall guy, but I still like to be able to turn on that ball with a 30 ounce and not really that 31. So wouldn't you know, the bat that he gives me for this thing is like a 34-32 or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell am I getting myself into here? And again, like nobody's got cell phones or socials or whatever. You can't just sort of, make something happen out of thin air. And I just remember I had to go to this session with a 34-32. And whatever they had the machine cranked up to is just like, I was hitting a few good line drives, but it just wasn't comfortable. You know what I mean? And again, I knew this wasn't some kind of big break or whatever, but you just want to show well, right? You want to show like, oh, I can turn on that inside pitch. I can go with that outside pitch. I can hit that, that one down the middle and just rip it right back, through the box. And it was like I was fighting the bat the whole time. So I was impressed when I was done that I just survived it because the bat was, I had a handicap of my equipment. And honest to God, I was like, oh my God. And again, like I said, it's not like, oh my God, I blew my big break or anything. I knew it was sort of just a, kind of see where things are going. And I think I remember him saying after the fact, like, hey, you got a big frame, you got a good attitude. There's a lot of things that, a coach or a program could work with here. Probably not, like realistically, we're not looking at like making calls down to the States or anything. He said, but I can certainly make a couple calls for you. And I can't remember if he mentioned Coach McRae by name or something, but he said, hey, I might make a call and have somebody take a look for a Canadian program or something like that.
There's a couple of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon here. So Daryl Kemp worked for Bill Bykowski for years because Daryl was scouting, and Bykowski was the Canadian director of scouting for the Jays.
Right.
He eventually moved to the Reds, but it could have come through the Daryl Kemp scenario. But I specifically remember this was a conversation with Coach McRae. But a really interesting small world in that I'm sure Daryl Kemp will have something to say about Bill Bykowski because he spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
And
again, I wouldn't have known until you mentioned it.
Yeah, it's the scouting world's a small one, Chris, from that perspective. Tell me about volleyball. So you've got volleyball. You've gone to this tryout where you the equipment was kind of more of the battle than anything.
Yeah.
How does this lead to Brock? Have you applied to universities yet, or is there? Is it a little more random than that?
I'll fill in those gaps because it's kind of funny. It's a funny story. So first of all, back to sort of that like getting into sports piece, made the soccer to baseball switch at about 12. And I went to my schooling again was kind of a unique path back when, and you might catch me saying like, why is he going back this far? But it kind of tells you where I ended up. But anyway, back when I was just about to enter school, like JK age, my mom worked for the Toronto French School, which was a private, all French school in Toronto. And she wasn't a teacher or anything. She worked in, kind of office administration, but you got a little perk where you could have your kids go there without paying the tuition. So she thought, well, what the heck? Why not bring my kid to school with me? And also right off the rip, he'll learn another language. So just by those kind of logical parenting decisions, I ended up at the Toronto French School, did JKSK grade 1, not knowing anything about anything else, right? Like this is my reality. And then my mom ended up changing jobs with losing the free tuition. So, we weren't, bursting at the seams of the bank account or anything. So, she kind of investigated, okay, well, I don't want to just, cut him off of this French path. So, she found out what was up with French public school. So I went over and did this little test because, I was kind of like an English first language guy. And if I was going to go to this all French school where, a lot of people mistake it for immersion, like this is all French, like phys ed is in French, math, science, everything's in French. So I did that little proficiency test and they said, yeah, you're fine. So went through that at 2 to 6, but then I leapt up to what ended up being the high school, which is where I'm leading us. But because the French school board is so small, I actually did 7 to 13 in the same building, if you can believe it. So that's like 7 years of school in the same building. So I didn't really have a middle school experience. It was just year 1 and 2 of 7 at the high school. And that's where the volleyball comes in because I walked in the door as a grade 7 and the VP at the time was also the boys volleyball coach. And he was one of those guys where, he'll watch everybody walk in the door for the first time. And he goes, you come here. He goes, do you play volleyball? And I'm like, no. He goes, well, now you do. So that was the start of that. So it's like, here's another sort of force feeding, experience that I ended up, loving for life where, I played volleyball 7, 8, 9, all the way to 13. Went with a high school teammate and played rep volleyball in my grade 12 year, I think. There's another connection. There's a guy on the rep volleyball team by the name of Dave Shepard. we played on that rep volleyball team. And then the next time I saw Dave Shepard, if you'll believe it, is out front of Brock where the club baseball sign-up table was. And Colin Tyler was sitting there, and Dave Shepard was standing there shooting the breeze with Colin Tyler. So I walk up and I go, Dave Shepard? And he goes, Gruchy, what's going on? And then he's like, oh, hey, this is my buddy Colin. And here's Colin, who, again, that was my first meeting with Colin after the whole playing, back in Scarborough and in the Leaside League. And I go, how do you guys know each other? They're like, oh, we're like high school buddies. So like Dave Shepard, I knew from rep volleyball. He grew up with Colin. I played with Colin, and all of a sudden we all kind of were standing at the same table in the Brock, the Brock entryway. Like, you couldn't write it any better, right?
Yeah.
But it came back after, because I kind of put volleyball on hold. I wasn't really pursuing it from a post-secondary standpoint. But what ended up happening, and I know we're kind of jumping around, but it's for the sake of the continuity in the moment. But when second year was over, and we're putting first year on pause here, so like Coach McRae is gone, Coach Lounsbury takes over. We have a great year. We host the SEBA Nationals. We lose in the championship game. And I remember just walking around, and somebody came up to me, and again, probably also part of Brock being a smaller campus, is somebody came over and said, hey, so-and-so said that you have a volleyball background. And I said, yeah, so what? And they're like, well, like the varsity team might want you to come out and have a look-see. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, no, like seriously, like we're not pulling your leg. Like, I guess they, had a spot on their roster. I'm kind of cloudy on why it happened. I just know it happened. So I just remember getting this invite, and I kind of got invited, and all of a sudden I was in this, like, again, sort of, no second chance to make a first impression. I all of a sudden was in the gym with the varsity men's volleyball team, and the coach was like, hey, just participate full on at the practice, and if things go well enough, we might keep you on as an extra rostered player. So I practiced, and we scrimmaged and stuff, and the outcome was they kept me on. So I actually was moonlighting as a men's varsity volleyball player at Brock in second year after baseball ended.
So you are a Bo Jackson.
Yeah, volleyball may not be as tough as football, but I mean, I have spiked it off of people's faces before, and roof blocked them where the ball hits the floor off my block harder than their spike hit my arm. So there is some real, you might say, pageantry and some in your face to volleyball. Yeah,
that's cool. I'm going to have a Colin Tyler moment, though. Here's my Colin Tyler moment. Given all the repetitions you get for spiking a volleyball, you'd think you'd be able to throw a baseball harder. There's my Colin.
Well, you know what I was going to say to you is, for all the volleyball that I played in conjunction with baseball, I wonder if I had a tired arm or had something wrong in there. Because I will say this, when I would try to amp it up, I did have a lot of pain. I did wear kind of an elbow sleeve at times when the pain was a little much. So again, not to be dismissive of the comedy factor of, I don't throw that hard, full marks for that. But, you just never know back then on what's up with what.
No, listen.
But yeah, no, speaking of that, I mean, arm repetitions out the wazoo for volleyball.
Yeah, for sure.
Spiking, blocking, everything. But I just developed that love, and, really got a great experience from, the VP pulling me aside and just saying, hey, tall kid, get over here.
It's super cool. I don't know anyone. I've never met anyone that's played dual varsity sports other than Coach McRae, who played, was a hockey player and a baseball player at Colby.
That's awesome. I will give kudos to one guy I know, and the only reason I know this, first of all, there's one, Colin, again, reminded me, we do chat a lot. We're not far away from each other. I'm in Ajax, and he's in North Whitby, Brooklyn. So we do connect, now and again in person, and have a good laugh hanging out, but we do talk quite often. And obviously with these podcasts going live, we, it really amped up the reminiscing and the remembering of things. But one guy was Sean Pearson, who pitched for the Brock baseball program, and he was full-on OUA wrestling guy, who was part of the legacy of those programs that would win championships and win Canadians. And so if you look that up, I can't remember. I think he was a second-year guy. But Sean Pearson, he looked like a wrestler. Carried himself like a wrestler, and then he would just get on the mound and he'd get you out. I think he had like a sub-1 ERA or something for us. He's one of those guys who you'd think from like pickup, like baseball or like just casual baseball, and he just threw all kinds of junk, like all kinds of arm angles and all kinds of finger positions, and he just got people out. Like it's just, he wasn't there to overpower you, and just it was kind of comical because we just had this wrestler who would just come out and just get outs. So there's a dual sport athlete for you who, you could narrow it down and say how many dual sport athletes played for the baseball program. Maybe I guess it's myself and Sean Pearson, but kudos to a guy on the volleyball team who I met through that experience. And he also played on the Brock golf team, Kyle Sadowski.
It's amazing. I think the amount of focus it takes to be good at one sport, I've got all the props in the world. What led you to choose Brock in the first place?
Here's a good one. So rather than being a victory lap high school guy, I almost ended up being that first year university victory lap, like generalist, not sure what I'm doing. Yeah. And that parlayed into Brock. So what happened was, again, I followed that like full French track schooling. It was a total nerd alert. Like I was surrounded by like very highly academic people, and I could keep up. Like I was doing really well for myself as well. And for lack of knowing what I wanted to do, I literally had my like credits, my like OAC credits were like biology, physics, chemistry, algebra, calculus, and English. And I also had to have a French credit because to get your full French degree, you need 5 French credits through your years, as well as the 5 English. So it was a grind. But then I was kind of there going like, okay, I've got all these good marks. I have you couldn't have less of a clue on what you wanted to do with your career than what I did at the time. So funny enough, I applied to Mac, Western, and U of T for like biology. Because just I was surrounded by people that was kind of their thing, so I was just kind of going with the nerdy flow there, and I got accepted to all 3. Living in Scarborough, I thought, the hell with commuting downtown, so I started my first year at U of T Scarborough, and just the whole combination of living at home and not knowing anybody when I got there. It was a miserable year. And also I found out I was in these math classes and these science classes. And as much as it was sort of a challenge in high school to say like, hey, I can do well at this. And, you kind of treat it as a game, right? You're like, can I ace this test, or can I do better than my buddy in this class? All of a sudden the fun was gone. It was kind of like, I don't like this math class. I don't like the science. I don't want to have a career in these things. So I was pretty miserable. I did play some volleyball. There was like some, UOT is so big. They had like inter-faculty sports. Would it be like, the downtown engineering school would play against Scarborough in volleyball. And then you'd have the Mississauga campus versus, like all this. So I played on like a men's volleyball team, and we won the U of T championship for whatever that was worth. So that was kind of fun, but that was like the only bright spot. And I just hated school, and it was like honestly the lowest year of my life. Like everything was fine. And then all of a sudden I was kind of like in this spiral of like, where am I? What am I doing? So what ended up happening was that was the summer where I hadn't played ball. U of T didn't have their team yet. So the funniest thing was that was the summer where all of this kind of intersected. So the Bykowski thing and whatever. And I was playing for Rexdale, and I remember it was just a nondescript middle of the week regular season game at York. And York didn't always have a team, like not North York, not East York, but York. And they had a field at like Black Creek and, south of the 401.
Hillsdale Park. Yep.
Sounds familiar. So we're at Keelsdale Park on a midweek nondescript night in July, let's say. And I'll tell you right now, if there's a life lesson or like a sporting lesson or anything, it's to never give less than your best, because you never know who's watching. Kind of like that, the cliche of like, well, you don't know you were scouted until after the fact, or that it happened. So if you were having an off day for whatever reason, or maybe didn't give your best effort, or didn't run out a ground ball, if in the baseball side of things, or whatever the case may be, or just hang your head or not sprint out of the dugout. So lo and behold, played that game. Now you're going to love this too, is I think people don't give me enough credit, I'll say this sheepishly, for back in the day, that I was pretty quick for a big guy. I was pretty quick. Yeah. I was pretty slender at the time still. And I remember in camp, we were running 60-yard dashes, and I had no idea what a good time was or a bad time. Bots was just blazing. And I remember I ran a sub-7. I ran like a 6.96, and it was like, oh, that's, you're this big 6'4" guy who's trying out at first base, and you're running a sub-7. And I was like, damn right I am. So anyway, leaning backwards is, ironically, that night I was hitting leadoff for Rexdale. And it was kind of one of those things where it's like, you know what, it's great if you hit in the 3 or 4 hole, but if nobody's getting on base ahead of you, what's the point? You're always hitting with the bases empty. So the coach, had a neat idea, and he said, you know what, you're hitting for good average, nobody's getting on ahead of you, why don't you just get on base? so if you imagine McRae's out, I don't know he's there, he's just off in the distance leaning on a tree, I think, or something, and I'm hitting leadoff and playing first, and I'm in and out of the dugout quick, picking the ball on plays. I don't know if I had to make any diving plays or anything, but just played all around good defense, maybe stole a base, maybe something like 2 for 4. I think, two good, solid contact base hits, and walked off the field. And I think it kind of went where he came up to me and introduced himself after and said that he was there to see me and that it was connected to the whole process that we've talked about. And I thought, holy shit, like even in the moment, I thought to myself, I just had a pretty good game and carried myself the right way. And you're surrounded by guys who, you always get, everybody who's in that league has a decent level of skill to even be in a lineup. But at the end of the day, you're going to have, sort of that bell curve of people who are taking things a little more seriously or less. And, I didn't let, people who might be joking around or doing the wrong things at certain times kind of distract me. And, I just thought, what, when you're between the lines, you're there to get things done. And I thought, holy shit, I just did that. And, again, it's not like I was 4 for 4 with 2 home runs and this and that, but, it was a solid all around game. And he just said, I liked what I saw. I saw you doing the right things. And, I want to have a conversation with you. So again, it's a little hazy on how it all happened after that. But I just remember Coach McRae took the personal time, and, I was not taking it for granted. He invited me down with my parents for like a school tour and stuff. And we showed up, and then we all hopped in the McRae Jeep, the open air Jeep. And he drove us around town and showed us around. And I thought, wow, this is kind of a big deal. And, again, it was sort of a very modest red carpet treatment. It's kind of like, just, hey, show up and best of luck to you. It was kind of like, come on down and I'll show you around and whatnot. But I do remember the caveat that, all that being said, he did say, you really do need to make a choice on coming to the school. He said, I can't promise you a spot per se. He said, we just have so many, like, I guess, at the end of the day, if you think about it, nobody had a guaranteed spot, right? Like even for you and Ted, who started the program, I guess in a way you had a spot, but like, all things being equal, nope. Anybody who was, not like, I guess nobody had a spot. Like he couldn't promise me a spot when nobody had a spot.
So this is where I'm going to talk about something that no one's ever asked me that question in 30
Yeah.
years. So Coach McRae has the most integrity out of anyone I've ever met, both in a good way and sometimes a frustrating way. But it's always good when you have integrity. Now, I don't mean that to sound in any way to be a negative about this. When Mike took the job to be the coach, he clearly, and I can't say this enough, he clearly stated that under no circumstances would that mean that Ted and I would make the team. Under no circumstances would anyone that was recruited in make the team.
Yeah.
And everything was always going to be based on performance on field or performance in practice and that kind of stuff. And, that was great. That's not the way things function in the Leaside Metro League. You were in a system and you were slotted in the system, and it was.
Yeah, no, I had a feeling that that's what you were going to say when you started off there. I do remember again having watched the other podcasts. I think I remember you saying that although you started the team, you still had to earn your spot. And I mean, at the end of the day, if all of a sudden we had this, incredible recruiting class of pitchers that bumped you guys out, you essentially would have been, still in charge of the team, but you just wouldn't have been on the field.
Wouldn't have been on the field. And I will, I think I think that is a real gift because it's not how it functions. And, I had come from a system where, and there's a couple of them out there, a kid named Josh French and a kid named Stephen Drews, who were good left-handed, both great left-handed pitchers, but in Oshawa, they had to start in the bullpen in their first year because, I was in that slot and I wasn't coming out of it. And it wasn't always due to performance. I performed well enough to be in that spot, but, that's how rep ball functions. But when you get to a higher level, Team Ontario, or, I played on a couple of all-star teams and some that were regional and provincial in nature, you have no guarantees that you're going to make the team. And some great people have been cut. So I love that answer. I didn't know that Mike had taken you on a recruiting trip to St. Catharines with your folks.
Yeah. And it was like, welcome to the big time, on a very relative personal level. But I also appreciated his answer because that'll come again full circle to how did I end up at Brock? Is here I was at a crossroads to I'm a current U of T student. I forgot to tell you that before he took me on this recruiting trip, I said this whole biology, science, and math, I can be a high achiever in school, but I really need to figure out something that I want to be passionate about. So I applied to the U of T phys ed program, which was like a really big deal to get into. I remember jumping through a lot of hoops and getting references and filling out all kinds of stuff. And there were still no guarantees. So kind of what another cool intersection story is, I can't remember if it was after the visit with McRae or before, but I got the letter in the mail and it said, congrats, you've been accepted to the U of T phys ed program. And that was going to be a whole paradigm shift for me. It was mandatory downtown, but it was going to just be this, there's going to be outdoor ed and just sports stuff and just all this stuff that, ironically I ended up getting into anyway with my career choice eventually. But at the time it was kind of like this super exciting opportunity. And I thought to myself, how do I not accept that? Right. It's kind of like U of T phys ed. It's there wasn't, if you were going to be in a phys ed program, it was arguably the best or one of the best, in the province. And I thought to myself, wow, that's kind of a big accomplishment to sort of, be where I was and then kind of just deviate over to this really, really exciting opportunity. So what ended up happening is I took a leap of faith and I declined it. And I said, you know what, this baseball opportunity it seems like something I really want to pursue. It seems like Coach McRae, in limited contact, still just exuded that professionalism and intensity and everything that I think that I like to personify when I've been coaching and teaching phys ed in my career and as a player. And so I just gravitated towards, it's ironic because here I had this opportunity again. I was locked in. Like I got accepted to U of T phys ed. All I had to do was check the yes box, and that's my path and my life there. But I actually turned it down, and Coach McRae, didn't beg me to come, didn't whatever. He just threw it out there to say that what he saw of me was something that, he'd like to consider having in the program, but like there were no guarantees because there were going to be a lot of people out, and I basically had to earn a spot. And I guess, the McRae aura mixed with the challenge of like, you know what, I think I almost want to take on this challenge because I think I want to be a part of a program that this guy runs. So it certainly wasn't the path of least resistance. It was the opposite because, again, I could have stayed at home and done the U of T thing and kind of patted myself on the back for being in a good program. And I did all the paperwork to transfer to Brock and applied to Res. And then, the funniest thing, here's another 6 degrees, is the phone rang. And I think it was a week or two before training camp. The phone rang, and guess who it was?
I took a wild guess and say it was your old friend Andrew Green, maybe.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. You win the prize. You can connect the dots. So, hey, Gruchy, heard you're a U of T student, U of T starting a ball program. I'm making the rounds and trying to leave no stone unturned. So obviously we'd love to have you out, whatever. And I said, Coach Green, lovely to hear from you. I am humbled and have gratitude for your call and for considering me. But I am now a Brock student, and I'll be attending Brock in a couple of weeks for training camp, and I'll hopefully be a member of that ball team, and I'll probably see you on the field. So, like I said, a lot of twists and turns and a lot of intersections because, again, some of my bigger, most important moments in my Brock career were against U of T because, not only Mac, but U of T were always right there in that Canadian side of high level competition. So yeah, that's like how I ended up at Brock.
It's like the movie Sliding Doors. All of a sudden, there, Grooch, you could have played for Rick Johnston and Andy Green at U of T. You had the maroon of the McMaster Marauders already. It's
yeah, that's a really, really far stretch on that one.
Wow. The good thing is you weren't sporting the knee pad on the outside of your baseball pants, so you could go to George Brown.
Nor did I have my kids in the stands at that age cheering me on.
I pick on poor George Brown mercilessly, but I will tell you that one of the best baseball players I've ever known went to George Brown and pitched there. Dave Hatch.
Yeah, I know Hatch from the Metro League.
Yeah. And so Hatchie ended up pitching and playing center field at George Brown. They kind of gave him whatever he wanted there. So, George Brown, God love him. They really struggled in that first year that they attempted to field a team, but eventually they got better. So, so this is great. You've decided to go to Brock. Do you remember what classes you were going to take? And
I remember full well because, again, I got to be a double pioneer because what ended up happening was I only considered it because I thought, okay, well, I got accepted to this big-time phys ed program at U of T. Brock better damn well have a phys ed program. And sure enough, they did. But I don't know how much you know about the Brock phys ed program, but it was a cruel joke once I got there because I was a phys ed major, but it was the Rudolf Laban, philosophy of movement or whatever it was. And I remember being in phys ed and instead of that sort of traditional phys ed experience, it was almost like this yoga-esque, like I want you to, I just remember it's like, okay, I want 3 parts of your body to be touching the floor, like whether it's like 2 feet and leaning back with one hand. And I want you to, express yourself like a tree. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is going on here? And so in a nutshell, that was the phys ed program at Brock. Like, sorry, I mean, there might be some phys ed grads in here, but, or, that know somebody, but I was like, this is not where I thought things were going to go. And, there's some other ball players in there with me, and we were all looking at each other going, what the fuck are we doing? And I just remember going, oh my God. So I was like, I was really happy about ball and happy about the, just the life situation and just kind of, like, again, I kind of uprooted myself and brought myself there. But I ended up being a dual pioneer out of the blue because they started similar to Dixon. I hopped into the second year grandfathered in sport management program. So if you had the right prerequisites from first year phys ed, they said, we're starting this phys ed program, and first year phys ed or whoever, like rec and leisure, like you just had to have certain credits. And if you qualified, you could declare to go into sport management. So I went into year 2, 3, 4 with Dixon and some other people that I befriended along the way. And we all graduated with a Bachelor of Sport Management and the first pioneering graduating class from Brock in 99. So yeah, I had the baseball thing and I had the sport management thing and I dabbled with the volleyball thing. I didn't tell you kind of the, some people who were watching who didn't know the volleyball story, they might say, well, where did that go? I don't remember you, transitioning or, moving over to volleyball. So I played the rest of that season with volleyball in second year, and they went from like September, but that OUA volleyball season goes all the way to the spring. So I guess once nationals were over, I spent, like November through to the spring with volleyball. And what ended up happening is they asked me and they said, hey, like that went pretty well. We need you, because volleyball starts beginning of the year, we need you to make a decision for next year, one or the other. Do you want to come and join and be a part of volleyball full time, or do you want to stay with baseball? You need to make a decision. So the funniest thing, funny and sad, is I didn't have to make the decision because the coach was either let go or left. And the program collapsed somehow, and the women's program continued at full strength. But essentially the next year, that was do or die for me to make this big decision. There was no volleyball men's program. So the decision was pretty straightforward at that point. And again, I think push comes to shove. I mean, I would have stuck with ball anyway. Like my roots were too deep on trying to, help the program be successful at that point. But it kind of took the stress out of, having to make a decision or having to let down the volleyball guys, or for them to, God knows what, make some kind of offer that would sweeten the pot. Who knows? Anyway, the team dissolved, and I mean, they have another team now, but I don't know how long they went. I think it was a number of years before they got a men's program back. So the irony was I came out, played for them between nationals in the spring. They said, you need to decide for next year which way you're going to go. And then they just like disappeared. So I was like, oh, okay. Still a ball player.
That's hilarious. Now going back, do you remember attending training camp? Do you remember that experience?
I do. And I've got a spicy take for you leading into that. Is I got dropped off. So when you're talking about the factions and sort of like the natural, like high school clique sort of thing, not in a negative way, but just sort of, attracting to sameness, like Oshawa guys, Burlington guys. So I got dropped off on, can't remember if it was the street where you lived or Pete's and the Houston brothers. But I got dropped off and you guys were playing catch in the middle of the street. And I just remember being dropped off, and it's just like, it's almost like out of a Disney movie, right? You get dropped off for training camp and here's the guys that you haven't met yet. They're playing catch in the street and all this stuff. And I ended up living on the Houston and Peter's couch for training camp, and honestly, it might have been 2 or 3 weeks or even longer than that into the school year. So I'm indebted to those guys for putting up with me, because then I finally got a res spot in DQ. But I digress. Here's a little spicy, put you on the spot moment that I saved for you. Is people were playing catch and whatever, and I wasn't the only one there, right? There were other people like me being dropped off who were going to get billeted for a short amount of time. And you were about 10, 15 feet away from me, and you're just shooting the breeze with Ted. And I just remember to this day, you turned to Ted and you said something to the effect of, "There's no fucking way any of these guys are making this team." and I was like, what? And I'm thinking to myself, do I go and punch this guy in the face right now? Or do I go and say like, hey, turn to me and say that? So, it might have been somebody who dropped a ball, like playing catch in the street or what, like, I'm not going to hold you to it, but I'm putting you on the spot, just saying like, there's a lot of moving parts at the time. And I'm not saying it to like, throw you under the bus, but you're running a team and there's so many things going on and there's so many people there, and, it's out of context. And, so like I said, hearing you say, "Oh, none of these guys are going to make it," I thought to myself, that sounds like a personal challenge.
I'm sure it was, but I think so. Look at the Oshawa guys. Obviously, I feel are going to make the team because I helped recruit them in and played with them before. But you have to remember that Ted and I got stuck with billeting just about everybody that was kind of not invited to camp.
I remember you saying that, yeah.
Like
I said, don't worry about.
I'm not worried about it. The reality is, we did have a whole contingent of absolutely brutal players that I would have to truck in my car every day.
Yeah.
And, they weren't going to make it, like, just from a talent perspective. And, Ted and I used to just sit there and get it, like, the hard part is, Chris, my opinion has changed over time, over a lot of this. 30 years gives you a much different perspective. And Ted said it in our podcast where he's like, we were young. What the hell did we know?
Exactly. And that's why I'm busting your balls about it, right? Is we're all young.
But I tell you, at the time, for me, it was simple. When you're a ball player, other ball players. You know what they look like on the field. You know how they carry themselves. You know how they hit. You know how they throw. You know how they pitch. And for me, it was a hard line. And so, Ted was so amazing to have around because he is a big-minded guy and a big thinker. And I am the reverse of all that, especially at that time in my life. I was a hard ass. I still am a bit of a hard ass when it comes to this stuff. So I didn't really I really despise the fact that,
and you're self-aware.
I was really, really despising the fact that we, because we had, some issues with people coming to tryouts that had phoned the school and we had to let them try out.
Yes. I remember you saying that.
Yeah. Like these kinds of things, that was frustrating to me because I just really wanted to get down to it. Let's get down to the 25 ball players here. Let's get down to the 8 to 10 pitchers here who can throw. Yeah. And because, I know what's coming at this point. We know that there's games going to be here before we know it. And we got to get about the business of being good because I didn't have great insight into how good U of T was going to be, but I certainly had insight into what we were looking at McMaster because I played with Bill Newton. I knew Brad Reeson was going there. Knew some of the other players there. Doug Lunny is another guy that I've known for a while.
Yeah, I knew him from Leaside League. I played for Newmarket.
Yep. So for me, I was just, let's get it on and let's, I didn't really want to spend a lot of time building bridges with people that weren't going to be there because the hard part is everyone assumed that Ted and I had some sort of magical ability to change the coach's mind, which never happened.
Right.
And when those 4 guys in our house got cut, and it was not at the exact end of training camp, but it was like the big cut down day.
Right.
They all took turns coming to Ted and I saying, "Do you think you can have a word with the coach? Can you
Oh
change
God.
this?"
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse in the world because,
Yeah.
it's just, as Ted and I would say, like, we're just as on pins and needles as everybody else is about making the team.
Yeah. We have our
And
ball player hats on. Our admin hats were
yeah,
left far behind at this point.
that once the season started, they rarely raise their head. But so the hard part is you get dropped into the weirdest situation I've ever recalled, which is we had a bazillion first basemen.
Yeah.
And so, Peters and Jess, Dixon and Colin and yourself. And I know the 2 other guys, I won't name them, but they were
Yeah,
the
I
2
know them
guys.
as well.
Yeah, I thought they were going to actually be our two first basemen coming out of camp. It was pretty competitive over there, and that must have been a little bit unnerving to just see how many people were in the mix there.
I will say, based on the sheer size and scope of camp in general, on a relative scale, it wasn't, disconcerting. It was kind of like, okay, well, there's this many people. I mean, you'd probably think that there's going to be at least this many over here on the corner. So I didn't really think of it any worse that way. It was more just about sizing up your competition. And, I think at the end of it all, I think all 6 of us were of a temperament where we were all gracious and polite to each other, but we all knew what was at stake. So I don't think any of us were ever rooting for another to fail. It was just more, I hope I have more success than them, if that makes sense, right? You're not like, oh, I hope this guy, misses the scoop, or, I hope he strikes out. It's kind of like, let the chips fall. And then if by the end of it, you had a better scrimmage offensively, or, made some plays defensively, then you knew that was kind of building your stock. And because like you said, with 6 guys, it's not sustainable. Now, God only knew that we were going to carry 4, which is still crazy to this day. But to be competing with 6 was really just kind of like put the blinders on, and, every drill you're in, give it 110, every at bat, every defensive play in a scrimmage where, obviously, people are tracking the ball, and the ball finds you a lot at first, whether it's for putouts or pickoffs or holding a guy on or whatever the case may be. It's just obviously a key spot on the field. So like I said, I don't think anybody was really kind of rooting against anyone, but it's hard not to, at least give it off that you're super confident in yourself and your abilities. And that's the approach I took, as I just said. I see a lot of guys over here, but I know what I'm capable of. And as long as I'm able to put together a camp where more often than not, I can show the better side of my abilities, nobody's going to have a perfect camp, but it seems like with this many days and this many 2-a-days and this many opportunities to touch the ball or take a swing, that I was just confident, not overconfident, but confident that the law of averages was going to work in my favor.
Were you ever concerned that you were going to get cut?
I don't think that concern ever went away until the list was posted. But like I said, kind of by keeping a close eye on the competition and knowing what I was accomplishing within myself, I think, have that confidence right through to the end. But again, you just never know what the coach's philosophy or like maybe they didn't see a couple of great plays that you made, so you're aware of them and they're not, or maybe, like they might have, you can't, well, like I said, the law of averages would say that you would hope it would work out in the end, that maybe if they miss a couple of positive things you did, or maybe miss or only saw a couple of negative things you missed and it didn't even out, you just figured there were enough eyes on you And again, like I said about even being seen by McRae at, on a random weeknight in July at Keelsdale, is like, just carry yourself the right way. Always show that you're willing to help out or do the right thing or pick a guy up or pat him on the back, or just, and not kind of like do things that are out of character, but like, forcing it, but like I'm like that anyway. So just be myself and work hard. And it sounds kind of corny, but I figured if I was just being myself and worked hard, that things would work out in the end, and luckily they did. Now, are we moving on to the drill or what?
No, I'm actually, I think, Colin and Jess Dixon kind of covered that, and maybe we'll get a little bit to what your mindset is there, but a couple of things I wanted to touch on specific with you, I think are a little bit slightly different slants.
Sure.
You kind of melded in quickly with the Oshawa guys, which was
yeah.
You have my deepest sympathies for having to live at the Houston and Peters place there for
I can vouch for a well-placed poster in the dining room that covered a man-sized hole from one of the many disagreements that happened on a daily basis between brothers.
Yeah, Larry
Can't remember what the poster was, but it was the right size.
Larry and Daryl didn't suffer. They didn't solve things, particularly at that point in their life, without a little bit of roughhousing involved. But so one of the more difficult parts of that is, Chris Peters, who's a great teammate to have and a great guy, but he's competing with you, and I know that, for him, he's feeling a little bit self-conscious that this is going to be tougher, I think, than anyone thought, because we went away, thinking that Colin Tyler was going to be a third baseman, and come there and there's Hoover, so Colin's now in the mix over at first. The other two guys that were big, imposing guys and had pretty good junior careers. There, obviously, none of us knew who Jesse Dixon was at that point, but obviously he is very quick and great with the glove and these kinds of things. Just tell me about, more the social aspect of hanging with the Houstons and Peters. I can vividly recall that Peters would always talk about, at that point, like me, you had hair, but your hair was exquisite. Your hair was pretty exquisite, and I remember Peters just.
Oh, that's saying a lot. I mean, let's go with it.
Yeah, but he would be all over you about being the ladies' man. That was the thing.
He had a little. He even put in that. So we have that Facebook group chat that I think you started last year when things were hoping to, fingers crossed, would have happened last fall. And I think I looked at it last night leading up to today, and sure enough, like the one thing that Peter said was like, "Hey Gruchy, do you still have that amazing hair? Maltese Falcon." Because my mom he did a little thing, because I've always been into the EDM, like the dance beats and all that stuff, and kind of like feeding into that stereotype of being like a European-ish guy. Like my dad's side is from like Newfoundland and like the English Channel Islands, but my mom's side is from Malta, which is pseudo-Italian. So as far as Peters was concerned, he would always sing this little song where he'd be like, "Don't stop, Gruchy, Gruchy, Italian stallion, Maltese Falcon." he'd say this line, and he's probably rolling around playing this back, but he'd do it better than me. Maybe you can get him to do it on the redo for him, but he'd be like, "Don't stop, Gruchy, Gruchy," like a song lyric, and then he'd be like, "Italian stallion, Maltese Falcon," because it all kind of rhymed. And that was just he was such a good character, and he's just so just kind of wheeling that together, is he was just such a big personality, but also smooth. Like he wasn't like this larger than life, like louder, attracting attention. But it's like if he had your attention, he had it locked in because he just had a great sense of humor and he's so charismatic. And just to answer your question about kind of getting in with those guys, with the Schwa guys, I'm sure it had a lot to do with billeting with them for, honestly, it might have been upwards of a month. But at the same time, there was also that Leaside Metro League connection where, funny enough, I mean, you could name quite a few guys who played in that league, but I don't remember them like by sight. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, like the Houstons and Peters, and, you know, like I remember a Lunny. I don't necessarily remember Colin being on Thornhill. I might be like, oh yeah, like he would say like I was on Thornhill, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I kind of can picture you there, but it's almost like the power of suggestion. Like, yeah, I can picture you there. But so there were a bunch of guys.
I can say this honestly now. Okay. Thornhill was defined by a guy named Nolan Revin who played there, who was a friend of Colin's, but he was just infamous, right? Like we all just wanted to hit him with the ball every time we saw him because he would have these crazy outbursts and crazy behaviors. And so Thornhill was a little bit of a wild card. They had some great players in the mix.
Yeah, he's still involved in ball.
I'm sure he is. And but they were so defined by the one personality as opposed to like a York, which was a Kevin Kim kind of a place. And Etobicoke was always about Warren Sakyu and a couple of other players there. You know, I remember pitching against Etobicoke, and Warren would.
And hey, when you go to that field, you better not even look sideways at the field. You better bow and pray to it and its greatness.
You know,
don't sneeze on it. Don't look at it. Don't step on the chalk with the corner of your shoe.
The best part about Connervale Park is I've never lost a game there and stuck it to Etobicoke for so many years.
Good.
But what used to drive me crazy is Warren Sakyu, who became a Blue Jays analyst. Played for Etobicoke, and he would have these fans of his that were girls that would come in. Every time he'd come up to bat, they'd be like, "Oh, Warren." So you can imagine how that went over with the rest of us, right? But, you know, I'm glad that, you know, because that was really the start of, you know, the breaking down of the Burlington, you know, Oshawa kind of dual tower there. People like Rob Green and I got very close on the team, and Simmons and Kasoyan in particular, you know, really bonded with, you know, you and the Houstons and Pete's. And Simmons and Kasoyan are going to be their own comedy duo by the time we get done with this, because they were just a ton of fun. But you know, there was that, and then, you know, we've talked about it on other podcasts. You start to kind of naturally also fall into another group that carries on to second year with Rick Bottomley and Colin and Tinnish. And, you know, and I always thought of you guys as just really into ball. You guys really love baseball. It turns out you were also taking classes together. So let's jump into a very, you know, a subject I think that's really interesting is to get your first impression of your dealings with the coaches. So at this point, you're now seeing the coaches for the first time. Why don't we start with Daryl Kemp? What did you feel about Daryl Kemp early?
Now, again, power of suggestion is I almost feel like the stories, you know, the myth just grows over the years, but, you know, it's kind of like, you know, he pulls up in this big Cadillac and hops out and is like this personification of what, you know, a hitting coach is supposed to be, or what they're supposed to look like and sound like. And of course I spent a lot of time with him, as did all of the position players and hitters. And just knowing that, you know, instant credibility, knowing that everything he was trying to tell you and have you work on was, him trying to be as efficient and to the point and helpful as possible, right? You don't want to sort of drag things out. It's kind of like, okay, I'm watching your swing. I see this. That's what I want you to work on. Do that for a little bit. We'll revisit it. So just, very knowledgeable. Like I said, instant credibility where you just see the personality and the charisma and the physical presence, the voice, and obviously the knowledge to back it all up. Funniest Kemp story. Again, Colin Tyler kept saying, "Oh, I forgot to mention this, that, and this." So was Scott Naples a first-year guy or was he a second-year guy? If you don't know the name, then he's a second-year guy. So Scott Naples came in, and we just remember being at the cage or something, and Kemp is sitting there, and this is, forgive my Kemp impression, but he's sitting there, and Kemp goes, "Bill," and nothing happens, and we're sitting there, and he goes, "Hey, Bill." He's like, "Bill." So we're looking at each other, and then Kemp's looking at us, and he's like, "What the?" And we're like, "Are you talking to Naples?" And he's like, "Yeah, that guy." And we're like, "His name's Scott." Like he was trying to call him Bill, and again, it's just one of those little like random stories that somehow survived 30 years because just the right people were there at the right time, and takes on a life of its own. And he had something to say. He's not one for names and all the time. You're trying to teach hitting. You're not trying to, like have a social club. So that was just a funny little Kemp one. But yeah. So
you obviously spent a lot of time with Daryl, and the great thing about Daryl is he, he's very focused, and then he would give you little life lessons and little snippets along the way, or he'd grab you for a random conversation at points. But, obviously, I think, very much respected by all the position players who spent a ton of time in the cage with him. And
for sure.
Did you have, do you remember what your first interactions were with Wayne Briggs-Jute?
I can't say I recall anything specific, but I certainly don't mean that in a negative way. No. It was sort of like I think it was yourself or who mentioned like he was everybody's uncle. He just was this calming, very, very low key, never really shouted presence. And again, just instant credibility that if he had something to say, you knew it was, you needed to listen and you needed to acknowledge the message because you knew that he had a lot of experience and was brought on for a reason. And, it's kind of like for position guys, it was kind of like, okay, he's not our hitting coach and he's not the head coach. And, he's kind of like one of those in-between guys like Coach Lounsbury where, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to say in between. I just mean he's on staff. He's there for a reason. But you just knew that if he had something to help with, whatever station he was helping out at or whatever he was working on, that it was definitely worth listening to. So a lot of respect to him. Again, I just saw him as recently as this summer at a little get together. And it was nice to catch up there and still, the same guy, just very soft spoken and to the point. And, the message is key, not necessarily, how it's delivered and just, I'll give you another one. This is kind of like a one coach at a time, but another one is the vans to Montreal. We had the pleasure of having Wayne as our driver. And he had the displeasure of having us as his passengers. And there were so many shenanigans going on in the van. And I can't remember every single guy because obviously we were packed in like sardines to, cut down on the number of total vans. But I remember we were just like, it was guys like going over the backs of different rows and just absolute shenanigans. And I remember at one point we were all just killing ourselves because Wayne was probably just so pissed inside, like just, like he just wanted kind of a calm drive and didn't want to have to deal with any behavior. And here's a bunch of like early 20-something guys acting like it was like a middle school, like sports trip or something. And guys are diving all over the place and putting each other in wrestling holds. And the funniest part of it was, as the myth goes, is the way he showed his disapproval is he would stare into the rearview mirror. So it's kind of like if you looked up and saw him looking back, it was, that was enough. I don't think he ever shouted or raised his voice. It was just the look. But what makes the best part of the story is I think at one point he set a world record for how long he looked in the rear view without getting in an accident. So I think things that escalated so much, like just, again, somebody's got somebody in a full Nelson and this guy's like jumping over here and crawling under there. And I just remember looking and he was looking back and I'm thinking, oh, this is bad. This is bad. Like, Uncle Wayne, so to speak, is getting pretty upset. And I just remember going like, man, do we have like a 10 count on him looking back here? Like, are we still in our lane? But I guess he had the hidden talent of looking disapprovingly in the rearview mirror at the wrestling match while also safely driving forwards. But yeah,
it's hard not to love Wayne. He is a lovable guy from that perspective. But you could see the look of disdain coming your way. I don't remember.
And again, it was only here, right? Because it's the rear view, so you get this, and it's kind of like. And you're thinking, man, I'm making eye contact with him for an awfully long time right now, and he is driving this van.
Well, let's dive into the season and talk about the Durham tournament, because that is certainly your first year highlight. Is hitting one over the train tracks at Iroquois Park is not easy to do.
Yeah.
So tell us about it probably was a highlight, I would suspect, for you in that first year of, helping us win that tournament with a huge, literally both in distance and timing home run.
Well, I will say this is, again, you'll get my closest of friends will be all over me for this, but in terms of the home run itself, just to kind of isolate in on this, I made sure to pull this off the shelf. So what I have here is, it just says first. Oh, so here's another piece, just to clarify, first hit and home run. So it was also my first base hit of any kind.
Wow.
At that point. And yeah, in the Durham tournament at Iroquois Park. And the funny thing is I've come full circle because, again, I've been most recently a health and phys ed teacher and a coach of many sports in the Durham Public District School Board, which encompasses, obviously Pickering, Whitby, Oshawa, Ajax. And, with my two daughters playing rep hockey, Iroquois has become, a focal point of a lot of sporting events. I'll actually be there for a playoff game for my younger daughter tomorrow night. She was in Oshawa last night, going to Clarington tonight, and then tomorrow is Whitby. So no rest for the weary on trying to get a provincial berth that way. But the funny story is, like everything, even in terms of the Metro League or anything east of Scarborough, I was kind of like very naive when I was younger. Like I had no exposure to anything east of Scarborough. So to me, like Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa, and beyond, it might as well all have been encompassed in Coburg. You know what I mean? It was kind of like almost like Game of Thrones. It was like beyond the wall. So it's like beyond the wall of the GTA is this great unknown. So it was like going out to Iroquois. It was like, again, I had played at Kinsman in the Leaside Metro League for Rexdale. Enjoyed my time there. And let's touch on really quickly that I was the starting pitcher in a game for Rexdale at Oshawa in Kinsman Stadium.
Well, the good thing is, Grooch, and I say this with all love and respect, Kinsman's a huge park. So
yes,
it's a pitcher-friendly park. So you couldn't have picked, if you had started at Bond Park or Bond was a bandbox, and so was Bishop's Cross.
Yeah.
Like if you had started one of those two parks, it could have been a lot uglier. But Kinsman's pretty pitcher friendly, for sure.
And I remember it just so the short version of that is I remember saying like, no, I'm good. And the coach, and we didn't have sort of like that, pedigreed long resume type coach. Our coach was a parent coach who his son was on the team, and no disrespect to him again, like I'm thankful for the opportunity to play there, and he knew baseball well, but I'm just saying, it wasn't sort of the Oshawa coaching staff or the East York coaching staff. It was kind of like, pardon me, I was thankful to just be penciled in the lineup every day at a position that, I was very confident and successful at, and a spot in the lineup where I could, be very successful, or at least have the chance to be. But yeah, he just said, we're a little short and I think you're going to throw tonight. And I was like, no, I'm not. He's like, yeah, you are. I was like, no, I'm not.
Why didn't you just, did it go well, or was it?
No, I mean, it didn't go as poorly as you may think. But it certainly was not it was more like pulling base hits through the hole on either side, or, it wasn't like, no home runs or anything like that, but it was like some walks mixed in around like good contact, and maybe some soft contact base hits, and just, like not getting shelled, but just not sort of, doing as well as you would hope to sort of hold the game in check, throwing fastballs and spinners, throw the spinner to offset the fastball.
That always works out well. I'm just letting you know that. I did that for years. So
yeah. So anyway, that was that. But back over to Iroquois is, you know what? I'll get a little philosophical on you as well. But just hitting the home run was a blur. I mean, when anybody's seeing the ball well or puts a good swing on the ball, the classic, like you just like swing for a line drive, and if you make the right contact, it'll go. So, not knowing anything about exit velo or launch angles or anything, we were playing Erie, and I just saw a fat pitch and just put my head down and gave it a go. And similar to what I had leading up in the years leading up to Brock, I had a reasonable amount of success hitting not only for average but for power, which, again, my longstanding Brock teammates will laugh at that, because this unceremoniously ended up being my only home run at Brock, was my first and only. But yeah, I mean, I just laid into it, and that was the end of that. But then again, a little ribbing between buddies. This ball I have, I'll laugh it off on behalf of Nish and Colin. This is a very old ball, but it did come out of the behind the fence area of that park at Iroquois, because my family was there watching, being from Scarborough, and my brother and sister, who are twins with each other, they're about 8.5 years younger than me. So my little brother at the time was so proud to go out behind the fence and look for the ball, and he came back with this ball. Now, who am I to tell him that this sort of muddy-ish colored ball is clearly not the ball that I just hit, but is more the thought and the action. Yeah. So, again, that's part of the story, and part of the lore is that's the ball I have, kind of with when and where written on it. But those guys will never let me live it down by saying, that's not the ball. That's not the ball. You didn't really hit a home run. It was foul. They'll just go on and on. But yeah, it was a good feeling, because just again, to contribute to the team and know that it was relatively early in the season, and kind of put my stamp on things. Again, you got the kindergarten club over at First, so it's kind of like, I think that ended up being the only bomb out of the four of us, because I managed to razz back at Colin that he didn't have any. I hit more home runs than him in first year. I'm laughing because I'm watching him laugh right now when he's going to watch this and get so angry, but in a fun way.
I think it's good that, I think there was lots of moments where people got to shine over the course of the year at different points. And that's certainly one that I clearly remember, just because it was a shot, and you don't see a lot of people hit it to dead center out that far. And, that's, it takes a shot to put it that far out of Iroquois. And, for us, the Oshawa guys, that winning that tournament was important for us. And I think started a forward momentum with our program too, because we then started to get into the Canadian schedule a little bit. And
Yeah. I'll bring up one other memento is I've got that, which I think is us celebrating the Durham tournament. I think that's what Bots is holding down here, Willie Mays Hayes. And I think that's the Kinsman wall in the background. But I forget, kudos to whoever threw this together. I mean, even again, back in the day, getting things printed up and laminated and stuff was certainly no easy feat. And I can't remember if it was Jess or somebody else, but kind of a clutch memento. I think everybody got one, and good on you if you still know where it is or you have it. But I have a little spot for Brock stuff just to enjoy and remember, and that's certainly sitting there as well.
Yeah, I think also I remember Jim Peters, Chris's dad, taking us all out for dinner after, and
oh wow,
been at Dines or Pepe's Pizza, one of these two. He was kind of tight with a lot of people in Oshawa, but I remember the parents were super amped about it. What do you remember about traveling to the U.S.? Like everyone's got a different. We all have kind of gone through the Cooperstown stuff a few times, but
right.
Did you get any other memories that could pop out of your U.S. experiences?
Well, I just remember again that uncertainty and that grind with the four of us who on paper were playing first, because again, with the lefty scenario and not really getting any looks in the outfield for myself, that is. Nor should I have been at that point. There's just no reason with that outfield rotation through the DH spot for me to even sniff the outfield. But just the lack of versatility, I guess, meaning, I was the only lefty over there. So that served me very, very well in playing my position. But then you had, I don't think Pete's really saw the field at another position. But Colin, I think his at-bats and his playing time were sprinkled between first and third. I'm sure he played a little bit of third and DH. So you could almost say he played, three different positions. Dixon, the same thing is, he had that versatility to be a backup infielder, basically, I guess, for argument's sake, at all four, and even as catcher. Can't remember in first year if he put on the equipment behind the plate. I know in subsequent years he did fill in maybe like a late inning replacement. So Dixon, as we know, had that versatility.
Here's a great trivia question. Okay, we had three catchers that all got at bats that everyone remembers, but we had a fourth catcher who got one at bat the entire year, and he was a call up from the JV team. Do you remember who that was?
I do remember for two reasons. Number one is, I think you mentioned it in a prior podcast. And number two, my cheat sheet of having the original photocopied stat sheet, I think it would be Daryl Duncan.
Yeah, like Daryl Duncan, who was a really personable guy. I remember that I had to maybe drive him to, and he was, just... such a random thing that Daryl Duncan had one at bat for the team over the course of the first year, and very interesting from that perspective. But yeah, you're right.
So yeah, I would have failed miserably if I didn't do my homework, which I'm known to do. So on occasion, because I watched my podcasts and you brought that up, and I also went over the stat sheet just to go through the names and think, holy cow, I haven't, seen or heard that name in a while, or this name. And there he was right down there. Under the ABs, it said one.
Yeah. Well, when Ted and I were first, I first talked to Ted about this a couple of years ago about getting around, I couldn't remember Ryan Thompson for the life of me.
Yeah.
I didn't remember the cut drill. I didn't remember anything. But Ryan was a big part of the team, and I should have, but it was completely, drew a complete blank.
I mean, I was there. I was a part of the cut drill, so we don't need to revisit that story because you guys have covered it well. Yeah. But even working backwards to think that Steve Vautour, being that incredible shutdown closer, but also just I mean, I don't remember a guy who probably hurt my catching hand, as much as Nish, other than Steve Vautour. So for him to play short and just absolutely beam it over and know that that was, you know, a done deal, but and then kind of having a sketchy memory on the fact that he didn't start the year with us, did he? And so
Well,
Ryan Thompson would have had
he kind of
some
eased
playing
his.
time before that.
Yeah, there was. I mean, my attention to detail or ability to recall this, but I think Vautour was like in there fairly quickly, but because he also pitched and because there were times, between Ryan and Kasoyan and Brian Simmons to a little bit, they all
Yeah,
kind of rotated through
yeah,
doing shortstop when Steve was pitching. And so, like it's a little hazy on those things, but
same. Yeah, I knew that Mark and Simmons were like penciled in up the middle at the middle infielder spots, and that Ryan was in there too. But
yeah, those
obviously,
guys.
I guess Vautour took over, as the importance of games and playoffs kind of ramped up. He kind of got slotted in there.
Well, we had Steve and Larry Houston taking so much of the middle infield bats, and Hoover was a fixture at third. There was it was unusual. Usually in the middle infield, you're rotating through 5 or 6 guys fairly regularly. But
Yeah.
let's get back to the U.S. Is there anything that stands out to you just in terms of those experiences that might be a little bit?
I'll tell you from a lighthearted standpoint too, just to give people a good chuckle, because I was going to say nothing necessarily from a playing standpoint, or I had been to I actually had been with that Birchmount team, ironically, which was that pre Metro League team that I played for in Scarborough, and we actually played a doubleheader on Doubleday Field in Cooperstown against a team out of Buffalo, and that so I already kind of had that sort of lore and baseball, soaking it in, Cooperstown type of trip. And I still have a picture from that day with like our team and the other team all kind of intermingled together, and that was a great experience. So it wasn't my first Cooperstown trip per se, so it was still special to go with a different group of people and for different reasons, but it wasn't sort of that wow factor, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
BB gun, obviously, just
Yeah.
next level hilarity, since I wasn't being shot at.
Yeah, of course. It's all good
But
for us.
just soaking in, and again, I can't remember game by game like who out of the kindergarten club was getting certain starts or coming in halfway in this. So I can't definitively say like, oh yeah, I played both ends of the St. Bonnie doubleheader, but I sat both ends against this team. Like it all kind of blends together, so you kind of remember moments more than anything. So I remember the theme, coming back to Coach McRae, who we haven't talked too much about in season wise at this point. Just that idea of not wanting to let him down. So always be on that edge of like, okay, I need to do things the right way and not disappoint him. And and again, some people operate well under those conditions and others don't, and I think I do. I like I kind of had that at that age. I still had a very, very high respect for authority kind of mentality, and it didn't matter that he was just a bit older. I mean, he might as well have been 35, 45, 55 rather than 25 or whatever he was at the time. I'm not placing a number on it, but
He seemed older than he was, that's for sure.
yeah. Or I'm just saying, just as soon as you tell me he's the head coach, like the number goes out the window and the position or the authority takes over. So I just remember just a boneheaded play. And again, I can laugh with the rest of us. I remember being on third, and it was kind of like, like we had learned everything about secondary leads and reading the play and the ball. And and again, I probably didn't play, all of both games, but I just remember being, like I said, I think it was St. Bonaventure because it was that real aura of a D1 school and the surroundings. And you might be able to corroborate this. Did they have a very short backstop at St. Bonnie? Because
Well, it was down the hill. I don't know if you remember that the tons of people sitting on the hill there, and I think the backstop was it wasn't deep.
Yeah. So what happened was I took a really aggressive secondary, and I'm kind of setting it up purposely this way. Took a really aggressive secondary, and the pitcher let go, and I read the ball, and it was super low, and I could tell it was going to be in the dirt. And I think it was like a perfect like hockey 5-hole shot on the catcher. Like he didn't stop it and then it like went up the first baseline or whatever. It literally just went through the legs. So I took off because like I could see it coming down. I took off, but the backstop was rigid and close, and it hit the backstop and came pretty much back to him. And I got tagged out trying to score. So the part I left out of this whole thing about not wanting to disappoint McRae is I came back to the dugout and he just gave me the death stare. And luckily he didn't scream at me. It was more kind of like I know you're trying to do the right thing, but it was pretty dumb. I think we were down by like 10 at the time when it happened. So I was like, okay, coach wants us to take a good secondary, and if the ball gets through, like take that base. So I went and I got thrown out because it got through and bounced back. And again, the semantics kind of make it even funnier. But he's like, he just, to paraphrase him, he just turned around. He's like, I like the intensity, but don't get thrown out at home when we're down by 10 on a ball with a wild pitch, whatever it was scored as.
And the impossible part is, it's now coming to me as my
the smell of grass.